On December 1, 1975, Kodak engineer Steve Sasson assembled a strange contraption. 8 pounds of lens, tape, and circuitry that could capture a black and white image without a single frame of film. It was the world's first digital camera. But when he showed it to management, their response was a quiet dismissal. "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." This was not a failure of vision. Kodak saw the future clearly and chose to ignore it. The company that built the first digital camera refused to sell it because film was too profitable. As Sasson later recalled, management said, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." So who built the first digital camera, and why did Kodak bury it? In 1975, a young engineer named Steve Sasson assembled a prototype from a Super 8 movie camera lens, a portable cassette recorder, and a CCD sensor. The result was a clunky 8-pound device that captured black and white images at a resolution of just 0.01 megapixels. But when Sasson demonstrated it to Kodak management, their response was dismissive. "That's cute," they said, "but don't tell anyone about it." The company saw no market for a camera that didn't use film. So the prototype was locked away and Sasson was reassigned. The invention that would define the future was deliberately suppressed. So how dominant was Kodak at its peak? In 1996, revenue hit nearly $16 billion with a market cap over $30 billion. The company employed 145,000 people worldwide, and film generated 70% of its profits. This was not just a business, it was an empire built on celluloid. But this dominance came with a dangerous dependency. A simple chart tells the story. Film profits were the foundation of Kodak's success. Any threat to film was a threat to the entire company. And that is why, when digital arrived, Kodak's leaders chose to protect the present rather than build the future. So why did nobody stop it? Because Kodak's own research told them exactly what was coming. In 1981, a confidential market study predicted that digital photography would overtake film by 2010, a forecast that proved almost eerily accurate. The study projected film revenue declining from $12 billion in 1981 to under $2 billion by 2010, while digital revenue would rise to over $10 billion, but Kodak's leadership chose to ignore the data, doubling down on film instead. As one former executive later admitted, "We invented the future, but we refused to sell it. The data was clear, the technology was ready, but the will to cannibalize a $16 billion empire was not." So Kodak sat on its hands. So why did Kodak spend billions on digital research, yet never fully commit? By the late 1990s, the company had invested over $5 billion in digital technology. But every step forward was restrained by the fear of cannibalizing film, which still generated 70% of profits. The numbers tell the story plainly. In 1999, Kodak's digital camera sales reached $1.5 billion, a respectable figure. But film revenue was still $8 billion. With margins far higher on film, any shift to digital would slash profits. The incentive was to delay, not disrupt. That calculation created a trap. Kodak's leadership knew digital was the future. Their own research had predicted it. But the company's structure rewarded protecting film. Every quarter of record film profits made it harder to justify a pivot. As one analyst put it, they were dancing on the edge of a cliff. What's the deepest irony of Kodak's story? They didn't just invent the digital camera, they also helped develop the very CCD sensor that would power the camera phone revolution. The same technology that would ultimately destroy their film empire. By 2003, camera phones were selling in the hundreds of millions, each one containing a Kodak-designed sensor. Yet Kodak earned only a fraction of a dollar per phone. They had built the engine of their own disruption and let others drive it. An anonymous Kodak executive later summed it up: "We invented the future, but we refused to sell it." The company that could have owned the digital revolution chose instead to protect its past, and in doing so, surrendered its future. What happened while Kodak hesitated? Competitors seized the opening. In 1999, Kodak held 27% of the digital camera market. But by 2003, that share had collapsed to just 15%. Where did those customers go? Canon and Sony moved fast, releasing sleek, consumer-friendly digital cameras that improved every year. Kodak's offerings, by contrast, were often rebadged versions of older designs, held back by the fear of competing with film. By 2005, Kodak had fallen to third place in digital cameras, behind Canon and Sony. The company that invented the technology was now a follower, and the film profits that once seemed invincible were vanishing fast. So how did a company that once commanded $30 billion in market value lose 90% of it by 2011? The answer lies in a decade of hesitation. While competitors raced ahead, Kodak's market share in digital cameras fell from 27% in 1999 to just 15% in 2003. Each percentage point lost was a step closer to the edge. By 2011, the company that had once employed 145,000 people had shrunk to just 17,000. On January 19, 2012, Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The New York Times reported the news as the end of an era. A company that had invented the future had become a relic of the past. From a $30 billion peak to bankruptcy court, the fall was swift and total. As one analyst noted, Kodak didn't fail because they missed the future. They failed because they saw it clearly, but refused to let go of the past. The company that invented digital photography became its most famous casualty. So what does Kodak's fall teach us? Harvard Business Review put it bluntly: Kodak had the technology, the patents, and the market insight, but they lacked the will to disrupt themselves. The failure was not one of vision, but of courage. Today, every major company faces the same choice. Will they cannibalize their own profits to embrace the next wave? Or will they, like Kodak, protect the present until the future becomes someone else's to claim? But Kodak didn't just bury the camera, they also held key patents on digital imaging. By 2001, they had over 1,000 patents related to digital photography. Yet instead of licensing them aggressively, they used them defensively, suing competitors like Sony rather than leading the market. Here's the missed opportunity. Kodak could have become the Qualcomm of imaging, earning royalties on every digital camera and phone sold. Instead, they earned pennies per device. By 2008, their patent licensing revenue was a fraction of what it could have been, a $1 billion stream they left on the table. But the problem wasn't just strategy, it was culture. Kodak's middle management was famously resistant to change. Engineers who pushed digital projects were often reassigned or ignored. The company's Rochester headquarters became a fortress of denial, where film loyalists controlled budgets and promotions. Meanwhile, Kodak's retail partners began to abandon film. In 2004, Walmart reduced its film aisle space by 40% to make room for digital cameras and accessories. Kodak's sales team pleaded with executives to accelerate digital, but the message was lost in a bureaucracy that rewarded film revenue. Leadership played a key role. CEO George Fisher, hired in 1993 from Motorola, understood digital's potential but couldn't overcome internal resistance. His successor, Daniel Karp, was a film company lifer who famously said, "We are not going to walk away from 100 years of history." That loyalty became a death sentence. By 2007, Kodak finally tried to pivot. They launched a line of inkjet printers, hoping to replicate the razor blade model of selling cheap hardware and expensive ink. But the market was already dominated by HP and Canon. Kodak's late entry earned them just 5% of the printer market by 2011. Too little, too late. And here's the final twist. After bankruptcy, Kodak sold off its digital imaging patents for $525 million, a fraction of their potential value. The company that invented digital photography now survives by licensing its patents to the very companies that destroyed its film business. The innovator became a relic, living off the scraps of its own creation. And that anonymous executive's words echo as a warning. We created the future, but we wouldn't sell it. Kodak's story is not just history, it is a mirror held up to every industry, every leader, every moment of hesitation.